The galaxy was vast, its stars glittering like scattered diamonds across the black canvas of space. The Imperium had ruled it all for centuries, an empire so powerful that it seemed nothing could stand against its might. Every world under its control bowed to the Emperor's will, and the few that resisted were quickly crushed. Entire systems had been swallowed whole, their cultures erased, their histories rewritten. The Imperium's military fleet was unmatched, its soldiers loyal and brutal, each one a part of the machine that kept the galaxy in line. Peace was enforced through terror, and there was no place for rebellion. But in the dark fringes of the galaxy, on the edge of known space, a flicker of defiance sparked. It came not from a grand army or a powerful fleet, but from a single vessel, the Aegis. The ship was small by Imperial standards, a far cry from the massive warships of the Empire, but it was not its size that made it dangerous. It was its captain. Captain Adrienne Kor had once been a strategist in the Imperial military. Her mind was as sharp as any blade, and her ability to predict her enemy's every move had earned her respect among the highest-ranking officers. But when she saw the Empire's cruelty up close, the massacres, the forced enslavement of entire species, she could no longer stay loyal. She had defected, abandoning her post and escaping to the outer reaches of space. For years, she had built a reputation as a rogue, operating alone and staying out of the Empire's radar. But now, she was ready to do something more. Kor's ship, the Aegis, was a symbol of defiance. It was fast, stealthy, and equipped with advanced technology that could help it slip through Imperial defenses unnoticed. Her crew was small but skilled, a group of rebels who shared her vision. They had come together, each with their own reason for fighting, united under the banner of freedom. Some had lost family members to the Empire's cruelty, while others had once been soldiers who had turned against their masters after witnessing the horrors of war. They were a mismatched group, but together, they were more dangerous than any Imperial fleet. The first mission was simple, a small strike against an Imperial convoy moving supplies to one of their military strongholds. It was a chance for the Aegis to show that it wasn't just another ghost ship lost in the void. The crew knew the risks. This was an act of rebellion, one that could draw the attention of the Empire. But for Kor and her crew, it was worth it. The galaxy needed to see that they had a chance. The ambush took place in a remote sector of the galaxy, where the Empire's patrols were sparse. Kor's plan was brilliant. Use the Aegis's cloaking technology to sneak up on the convoy, disable their engines, and escape before the Empire could respond. The convoy's cargo was critical to the Empire's operations, and losing it would be a blow, even if it was small in the grand scheme of things. As the Aegis dropped out of hyperspace, the crew went to work. The convoy didn't stand a chance. The battle was quick, decisive, and clean. They disabled the Imperial ships without casualties on their side, sending a message to the Empire. Someone was fighting back. The crew barely had time to celebrate before they were on the move again, heading into the depths of space, disappearing into the vastness. The Empire wouldn't take this lightly. But Kor had done what she had set out to do. She had sent a whisper of rebellion across the galaxy. And now, that whisper would grow louder. The message spread faster than Captain Adrienne Kor had anticipated. It wasn't just the Imperial convoy that had been struck. It was the very idea of a rebellion. The Aegis had become a symbol. People on oppressed worlds whispered about it in hushed tones, sharing stories of the lone ship that had dared to challenge the might of the Empire. It didn't matter that the attack was small. The idea of defiance had sparked something in the hearts of the galaxy's downtrodden. Back in the heart of the Imperium, the Empire's leadership took notice. At first, they dismissed it as a minor inconvenience, an isolated raid by a rogue ship, nothing to worry about. But as the days passed, the frequency of attacks increased, and with each victory, the embers of rebellion grew brighter. Kor had expected retaliation. She knew the Empire would react with anger, perhaps with an overwhelming show of force. But what she didn't expect was the shift it caused among the oppressed populations. Discontent had been simmering for years. There were whispers of rebellion in nearly every system controlled by the Imperium. But those voices had been silenced, one way or another. Now those voices were finding their courage again. The Aegis wasn't just an attack on the Empire's military. It was a challenge to the very structure of Imperial control. On distant worlds, resistance movements that had once been fractured and weak began to form alliances, drawn together by the stories of Kor's crew and their unyielding resolve. Farmers, miners, scientists, and former soldiers, all united by a common goal: to overthrow the Empire. Messages of support and supplies flowed to the Aegis, and Kor's crew found themselves not only fighting the Empire but building something larger, a movement, a force that could one day stand against the Imperial legions. But Kor knew they couldn't afford to rest on their growing influence. The Empire wasn't known for its mercy. In fact, they were already mobilizing to wipe out this fledgling rebellion before it could gather more strength. The Emperor, furious at being mocked by a single vessel, ordered a special fleet to track down and destroy the Aegis and every last trace of resistance. In response, Kor made a bold decision. She would take the fight directly to the Empire. She could no longer afford to only strike at isolated targets. If the Aegis were to survive, the rebellion needed to show the Empire that they could bleed, that they could fight back on a larger scale. Kor gathered her crew, now bolstered by new recruits and new ships. The Aegis was no longer just a symbol. It was becoming the flagship of a growing fleet of rebels. The mission was risky, a direct confrontation with an Imperial patrol fleet that was in charge of guarding a critical supply route. If they could cripple this fleet, it would send a clear message. The Aegis wasn't just a rogue ship. It was the tip of an unstoppable spear. The day came when the rebels made their move. The Aegis led the charge, its engines roaring through the void as it sped toward the fleet. The Imperial ships, large and menacing, loomed ahead, but Kor was ready. She had studied every ship, every movement, every pattern. The Aegis used its advanced cloaking systems to approach the Imperial fleet undetected. At the perfect moment, the Aegis decloaked and chaos erupted. The battle was fast and brutal. The Empire's ships, caught off guard, struggled to respond. The Aegis struck like a lightning bolt, swift, precise, and ruthless. The rebels disabled several of the enemy ships, their crew not expecting to be overpowered by a single vessel. The Aegis and its fleet moved with surgical precision, avoiding the full force of the Empire's retaliation. The message was clear. The rebels were no longer small, insignificant. They were a threat, and they had the power to strike. By the time the battle ended, the Empire had lost valuable ships and supplies. The rebellion had proven it could go toe-to-toe with the Empire and survive. Kor knew that this victory, though significant, was only the beginning. The Empire would come for them with even greater force, but this time, the galaxy would be watching. And that, in itself, was a victory. The victory over the Imperial fleet had sent ripples through the galaxy, but the Empire was not one to tolerate weakness, especially not from a single ship. The Aegis's success against an Imperial fleet made the Emperor's blood boil. The whispers of rebellion had grown louder, and now they had manifested into a real threat. The Empire's elite officers and generals knew what needed to be done. The Aegis had to be crushed, and its captain, Adrian Kor, needed to be eradicated. Kor's victory had proven the impossible. A single vessel could challenge the Empire. The strategic brilliance of the Aegis was unmatched, and its crew, a mix of experienced soldiers and tacticians, had developed a reputation for hitting where it hurt the most. The Empire's tactics relied on overwhelming force and control, but the Aegis and its rebels used the element of surprise, speed, and calculated precision. Every victory, no matter how small, was a nail in the Empire's coffin. Kor knew the Empire would retaliate, and they did with unimaginable force. The Emperor mobilized an entire battle group, the Dominion fleet, under the command of one of his most ruthless admirals, Terran. She was known for her cold efficiency, her ability to hunt down and eliminate rebels with chilling precision. Her fleet, more than capable of crushing any opposition, was a deadly combination of dreadnoughts, cruisers, and elite strike teams. The Aegis wasn't afraid, but the stakes had risen. This wouldn't be a simple raid or skirmish. This would be a direct confrontation between the Empire's might and Kor's growing rebel fleet. Kor had no illusions. This battle could be the last for her and her crew, but it was necessary. The rebellion needed to show the Empire that they could strike back, that they would never be silenced again. For days, Kor and her crew prepared. The Aegis was now a symbol, its importance magnified. But the stakes were higher than ever. If the rebellion lost this battle, they could never recover. Kor's plan was risky, but it had to work. She would use their enemies' arrogance against them, making them believe they had the upper hand, only to turn the tables at the last moment. The Aegis and its fleet moved into position near a dark nebula, an area where the Empire's sensors were limited. They used the nebula as a shield to mask their movements, waiting for the inevitable Imperial response. Kor's heart raced as she watched the Empire's fleet approach, unaware that they were walking into a trap. Admiral Terran's fleet moved into the nebula, confident that the Aegis was hiding somewhere inside. But Kor had anticipated this move. As the Imperial ships entered the nebula, the Aegis and the rebel fleet made their move. The Aegis dropped out of hiding and fired on the lead dreadnought, immediately disabling its weapon systems. Rebel ships attacked from all sides, hitting weak points in the Imperial fleet's formation. Chaos ensued. Terran's ships struggled to reorganize as the rebels, using their knowledge of the nebula and their advanced stealth technology, attacked in waves. The Imperial fleet, caught off guard, was disoriented. Kor's fleet moved with precision, targeting weak points and making quick getaways before the Empire could retaliate. For hours, the battle raged. The Aegis was everywhere, its attacks relentless. Rebel fighters darted through the chaos, striking Imperial ships with surgical precision. But the Empire wasn't entirely unprepared. Terran's forces began to regroup, pushing back with increasing force. The tide of battle began to shift, and it became clear that the rebels couldn't maintain their hit-and-run tactics forever. Just when it seemed the Aegis might be overwhelmed, Kor activated her final plan. Using the nebula's natural electromagnetic fields, she created a disruption in the Imperial fleet's communications, causing confusion among their ranks. At the same time, the Aegis launched a final strike against Terran's flagship, the Dominion. The attack was brutal, swift, and precise, taking out critical systems and forcing Terran to retreat. The Aegis and its fleet had won, barely, but the victory was not without its costs. Several rebel ships were lost, and the Aegis itself had taken significant damage. However, the message was clear. The Empire was not invincible. And Kor had proven once again that with courage, strategy, and unity, even the smallest force could topple an empire. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Kor and her crew had shown the galaxy that it was possible to fight back, and they had no intention of stopping. The victory at the nebula had shaken the Empire to its core. The Aegis had outmaneuvered and outsmarted Admiral Terran's fleet, but more importantly, it had shown the galaxy that the Empire was not invincible. News of the rebellion's triumph spread far and wide, and people on oppressed worlds began to rise up. The rebellion had become more than just a single ship. It was becoming a movement. For the first time in years, hope flickered across the galaxy. Planets that had once submitted to the Empire's rule without question now found themselves questioning everything. Former slaves and workers, once bound by chains of fear and oppression, now looked to the Aegis and its crew as symbols of freedom. The rebellion, once a whisper in the dark, was quickly becoming a force to be reckoned with. Kor knew this momentum couldn't be squandered. The Aegis had become a beacon of resistance, but the war was still far from over. The Empire would strike back harder. The question wasn't whether the Aegis could survive. It was whether the rebellion could take the next step and challenge the Empire's power on a larger scale. The Empire was not an entity that would break easily. Under the Emperor's iron grip, it had swallowed countless worlds, crushed countless uprisings, and defeated countless enemies. It was a system built on fear, and that fear was its greatest strength. The cracks, however, were beginning to show. Even within the Empire's ranks, there were murmurs of discontent. Some of the Empire's officers had begun to question the legitimacy of the Emperor's rule. Rumors of unrest spread through the Imperial military. Officers who had been loyal to the Emperor for years began to wonder if it was time to side with the rebellion. On several worlds, the Imperial forces were stretched thin, trying to maintain control over rebellious factions while fighting an expanding rebellion. The Empire's grip was slipping, even if the Emperor refused to admit it. Kor seized on this opportunity. The time had come to strike at the heart of the Empire. It wasn't enough to win skirmishes or destroy isolated patrols. To cripple the Empire's military might and send a message that would echo across the galaxy, they needed to target the Aether Core, the central power source of the Empire's war machine. Without the Aether Core, the Empire's fleets, weapons, and energy supply would be severely crippled. The heart of their empire would falter. The Aether Core was housed in a fortress-like facility on the Empire's most heavily guarded planet. Located in the core systems, it was surrounded by layers of defenses, orbital stations, planetary shields, and elite Imperial Guard units. Getting there would be nearly impossible. But Kor was used to impossible odds. With the help of her growing fleet, she set her sights on infiltrating the heart of the Empire's power. The plan was dangerous, even by Kor's standards. A direct assault was out of the question. The Aether Core was too well defended. But Kor had something the Empire didn't: the element of surprise. She would use the galaxy's growing unrest to her advantage. Rebel cells, once small and disorganized, had grown into well-coordinated factions. Kor's intelligence network had identified weak points in the Empire's defense grid. The rebellion's new plan was simple: draw the Empire's attention to a series of coordinated attacks on peripheral worlds, creating chaos. While the Empire's forces scrambled to respond to the new uprisings, Kor would use a smaller elite strike team to infiltrate the Aether Core facility. They would disable the core, destabilizing the Empire's ability to wage war. The crew of the Aegis was ready. Their mission would take them deeper into enemy territory than ever before. The risks were high, but the potential payoff was even greater. If they succeeded, the Empire would lose its most powerful weapon, and the rebellion would have a chance to shift the balance of power. But Kor knew that the closer they got to the Aether Core, the more dangerous it would become. The Empire was watching, and they would stop at nothing to protect their most prized possession. Kor and her crew were prepared for whatever came next, but they couldn't afford to make a single mistake. As they set course for the Empire's capital system, the weight of the mission settled over them. It was time to strike the heart of the beast. The Aegis glided silently through the vastness of space, its course set for the Empire's capital system. The rebellion's strategy was bold: distract the Empire with uprisings across the galaxy, while a small elite team infiltrated the heart of the Empire's power. The Aether Core, the central nexus of Imperial military strength, was located on the planet Ashera, heavily guarded by layers of defense systems and protected by the Emperor's most loyal soldiers. Kor knew the risks, and so did her crew. This mission would either change the galaxy's fate or end them all. The crew had prepared for this moment. The rebellion's growing fleet had launched simultaneous attacks on several Imperial-controlled systems, sparking chaos and confusion across the Empire's outer territories. Imperial forces were stretched thin, their resources divided as they fought to suppress uprisings while trying to find the source of the rebellion's growing strength. It was a perfect opportunity for Kor and her team to strike. The Aegis wasn't just a ship, it was a symbol, and Kor knew that it could no longer remain a lone ghost in the shadows. The rebellion needed to make a statement. The target was simple: disable the Aether Core, cut off the Empire's ability to maintain its vast war machine, and shift the balance of power once and for all. As the Aegis approached Ashara, Kor's pulse quickened. The plan was to slip past the Imperial defenses undetected, land on the planet's surface, and infiltrate the facility where the Aether Core was housed. The Aegis was equipped with advanced cloaking technology, but the planet itself was surrounded by an impenetrable defense grid, one that could detect even the slightest movement. Kor's crew had trained for months, running simulations, fine-tuning every detail of the mission. There would be no room for mistakes. As the Aegis neared Ashara's atmosphere, Kor watched the planet grow larger on the view screen. Its icy, mountainous landscape was the last place anyone would expect to find the beating heart of the Empire's power. But beneath its surface, the Aether Core pulsed, a vast and dangerous engine that powered the Empire's military might. Kor's heart raced as she knew that once they landed, there would be no turning back. The Aegis's cloaking systems worked, allowing them to bypass the Imperial satellites that orbited the planet, but the greatest challenge lay ahead: the planetary shields. Kor had coordinated with a small squad of rebel hackers who had infiltrated the Empire's communications network, and they had given her the coordinates for a vulnerable entry point in the defense grid. But there was no telling how long they would have before the Empire noticed their presence. Kor issued her final orders. "Everyone, prepare for a stealth entry. We go in, we get the core, and we get out. No distractions." The team suited up, each member ready for the mission. The Aegis descended through the atmosphere, guided by the faintest glimmer of hope. As the ship approached the landing zone, Kor's heart beat faster. She knew the odds were against them, but this was the moment they had been waiting for. If they succeeded, the Empire would be crippled. If they failed, they would be wiped out. The landing was smooth, and the Aegis set down in the shadow of a massive mountain range, hidden from the eyes of the Empire. Kor, along with her most trusted officers, Ronan, a former Imperial soldier who knew their tactics inside and out, and Lyra, an expert in sabotage, led the strike team to the surface. The rest of the crew stayed aboard the Aegis, monitoring the situation and preparing for an emergency extraction if needed. The team made their way through dense forests and rugged terrain, evading Imperial patrols and security systems. Every step was calculated, every movement deliberate. The Aether Core facility was buried deep underground, and the team was prepared to face whatever defenses the Empire had placed in their way. Finally, they arrived at the entrance, a massive steel and durasteel door set into the side of the mountain. It was fortified with layers of security, but Lyra's expertise quickly went to work. The hacking team had sent the right codes, and within minutes, the door opened with a loud hiss, revealing the cold, sterile interior of the Aether Core facility. Kor's breath caught as they moved deeper into the complex. They were in. Now, all they had to do was disable the core, and the rebellion would have the power to change everything. The air inside the Aether Core facility was cold and sterile, carrying the faint hum of Imperial technology. Kor led her team down narrow, dimly lit corridors, every step echoing off the metal walls. The sound of their boots was muffled, but every movement was calculated. They couldn't afford to alert the Empire's forces before they reached the core. Every corner, every junction, could be a trap. Ronan, the former Imperial soldier, kept his eyes scanning the walls, searching for signs of surveillance or patrols. He knew the Empire's tactics inside and out, and he was ready for anything. Lyra, the sabotage expert, walked silently ahead, her hands already working on a small console beside a massive door. She accessed the lock with practiced precision, the quiet beep confirming that they were still undetected. Kor's heart pounded in her chest, but she maintained focus. The Aether Core was more than just a power source. It was the key to everything the Empire had built. If they could disable it, they could cripple the war machine, and the rebellion would finally have the upper hand. But time was running out. If the Empire detected them, they would be caught in a deadly game of cat and mouse. The door opened with a soft hiss, revealing a vast chamber at the heart of the facility. The Aether Core was located in the center, a massive structure that pulsed with energy, glowing with a cold blue light. The core was the size of a small city, its presence a testament to the Empire's technological might. Core could feel the weight of it, the hum of power resonating through her bones. "We're in," Core whispered, her voice low. "Lyra, set the charges. Ronan, cover our backs." Lyra nodded, stepping forward with the confidence of someone who had dismantled more than her fair share of Imperial systems. She approached a central terminal beside the core, her fingers flying over the console as she worked to plant the explosives that would destabilize the power source. Ronan positioned himself near the entrance, scanning the area for any signs of movement. Core stood between them, her eyes darting between the core and the door. Every moment felt like an eternity. Minutes passed, and Lyra's work was nearing completion. Core felt a strange mix of anticipation and dread. They had come so far, and yet they were still so vulnerable. The Empire would not let this stand. If they were lucky, they would escape before the alarms were triggered. If not, they would be dead long before they could reach the Aegis. Then, without warning, a shrill alarm pierced the silence. "Damn it," Ronan muttered, already moving toward the door. "They'd found us." Core didn't hesitate. She rushed to Lyra's side, pulling her back from the terminal as the explosives were triggered. The Aether Core rumbled, its energy flaring as it began to destabilize. The entire facility shook, and the walls groaned under the strain of the massive power source. "We've got to move," Core shouted, her voice steady but urgent. Lyra grabbed her pack and sprinted toward the door. Ronan was already ahead, covering their retreat. The facility was alive with the sound of alarms blaring, and the flashing red lights warning of imminent failure. The rebels knew they had only moments before the Empire's security forces arrived in full force. The team made their way back through the corridors, moving faster now, the echoes of their footsteps replaced by the distant sound of approaching Imperial soldiers. Core's pulse quickened, but she remained focused. They couldn't stop now. The Aether Core was on the brink of collapse, and with it, the Empire's most potent weapon. But there was still one hurdle left: getting to the surface alive. As they reached the exit, the blast doors ahead opened with a hiss. A platoon of Imperial guards stood in their way, weapons drawn and ready. They had no choice but to fight their way out. "Ronan, hold them off," Core commanded, her voice sharp. Ronan's blaster fired with deadly accuracy, taking down 2 of the guards before they could even react. The rest dove for cover, returning fire. Core pulled Lyra to the side, using the chaos to move toward the exit. The team was making progress, but the guards were relentless. Just as Core thought they might be overwhelmed, the sound of another ship's engines echoed through the facility. The Aegis had arrived. "Get to the ship," Core yelled. The team sprinted toward the surface, their hearts pounding in their chests. The Aegis hovered just above the landing pad, its engines glowing bright against the night sky. With the Aether Core now a ticking time bomb, there was no time to waste. The rebellion had struck at the Empire's heart, and now they had to escape before it all came crashing down. As the team boarded the Aegis, the facility behind them erupted in a blinding flash of energy. The Aether Core had gone critical, and the Empire's strongest weapon was no more. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, the Empire had been dealt a crippling blow. The rebellion had proven that it could strike at the very heart of the Empire and survive. The explosion that obliterated the Aether Core echoed throughout the galaxy, sending shockwaves through both the Empire and the rebellion. Core watched from the command deck of the Aegis as the bright flash of energy illuminated the horizon of Ashara, the shockwave rippling across the atmosphere. They had done it. The Empire's greatest power source was gone, and with it, their military strength had been severely weakened. But Core didn't have time to savor the victory. The Aegis had already begun its swift departure from Ashara, and the moment they cleared the atmosphere, The alarms blared, signaling the Empire's response. The momentary lull in the war was over. The Empire would not let this act of defiance go unpunished. "We're not out of the woods yet," Ronan said, his voice tense as he monitored the scanners. "They'll come for us. Hard." Kor nodded grimly. The Empire wouldn't waste time licking its wounds. They would retaliate with overwhelming force, and the Aegis and its ragtag crew would be their first target. She could already hear the angry orders echoing in her mind. The Empire's response to losing their most critical asset. The Aegis shot into hyperspace, narrowly avoiding a squadron of Imperial interceptors that appeared on their tail as they entered the jump. Kor felt the tension of the moment, knowing they had barely escaped the Empire's grasp. But there was no time to rest. The rebellion was fragile, and this victory had made them a bigger target than ever before. "Where do we go now?" Lyra asked, her voice sounding slightly strained from the adrenaline of the mission. Kor took a deep breath, glancing at the holographic map of the galaxy. "We need to regroup. The fleet's not large enough to take on the Empire directly, but we have to continue pushing, while we still have the momentum." Her mind raced. They had dealt the Empire a significant blow, but it was only a small part of the war. The galaxy was still a vast and oppressive place, with countless worlds under the Empire's iron rule. The rebellion couldn't afford to waste this opportunity. They had to spread the message, gather more support, and strike before the Empire could fully recover. As the Aegis traveled through hyperspace, Kor's thoughts turned to the next step. They needed allies, worlds that had been under the Empire's control for too long, planets where the people were hungry for change. But how would they convince them to join the fight? How could they convince an entire galaxy to rise against the Empire when it seemed like they were outgunned at every turn? Before she could dwell on it further, the calm voice of her communications officer, Jace, broke her thoughts. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission. It's from one of the rebellion's hidden cells." Kor's brow furrowed. "Patch it through." The screen flickered to life, revealing a familiar face. It was Talia, a leader of one of the largest rebel factions on the Outer Rim. "Captain Kor, we've been hearing rumors. The Empire is gathering forces," Talia said, her voice strained. "They've begun mobilizing new warships and reinforcements. And worse, there are whispers of a new weapon in development, something devastating. They're not just angry. They're planning to obliterate everything you've worked for." Kor's mind spun. The Empire was regrouping faster than she'd feared. A new weapon? What could it be? "How soon?" Kor asked, her voice unwavering despite the cold chill creeping up her spine. "We don't know exactly, but it's moving quickly. They're preparing for something big, something that could wipe out entire fleets. We think it's connected to the remnants of the Aether Core, and possibly even the Emperor's own secret projects." Kor's pulse quickened. A new weapon could tip the scales in the Empire's favor. This wasn't just a threat to the rebellion. It was a threat to every living being in the galaxy that longed for freedom. "We'll need to rally the fleet," Kor said, her voice steady despite the urgency. "We can't face this new weapon alone. We'll gather our forces and hit them before they can finish it." Talia nodded. "Be careful, Kor. The Empire won't stop until you're destroyed." Kor's resolve hardened. "And neither will we." As the transmission ended, Kor gathered her most trusted officers in the war room. The rebellion was small, its resources limited, but they had the most important thing the Empire didn't: hope. They had the will to fight, and they had a cause worth dying for. "This isn't just about one battle anymore," Kor said, her eyes fierce. "This is about showing the galaxy that the Empire isn't invincible. We've shaken their foundations. Now we strike again, harder." The stakes had never been higher. The Empire's wrath would be swift, and their new weapon could end everything. But Kor knew one thing: if they could survive this next fight, they could change the course of history forever. The Aegis had barely slipped into hyperspace before the rebellion's fleet began to assemble. Kor could feel the weight of what they were about to face. The Empire had been wounded, but it wasn't finished. A new weapon, one that could alter the course of the war, was looming. If the rumors were true, it was far more advanced than anything they had encountered before, and they couldn't afford to wait and hope the Empire's new weapon was just a bluff. Gathering the fleet was no easy task. Kor had only a handful of ships to start with, and many of the rebel cells still lacked the resources and training to mount a significant assault. Yet, across the galaxy, more systems were beginning to rise up. The destruction of the Aether Core had spread like wildfire, igniting hope in the hearts of those long oppressed by the Empire. The time for caution was over. The rebellion needed to strike while it had the momentum. As the fleet came together, Kor stood on the bridge of the Aegis, watching the holographic displays of the ships assembling in the outer rim. The rebel commanders were on their way, and soon they would all be united in one final push. But the uncertainty of what they were about to face loomed over her like a storm. "Captain," Jace's voice broke into her thoughts. "We've got an incoming transmission." "It's from Admiral Terran." Kor's eyes narrowed. The name was one she hadn't heard in a while. Admiral Terran had once been one of the Empire's fiercest leaders, until the Aegis had wiped out a key part of his fleet. She hadn't expected him to be in contact, especially not after such a humiliating defeat. "Put it through," Kor ordered. The screen flickered to life, revealing Terran in his usual crisp uniform, his expression unreadable. His reputation had been that of an unrelenting strategist, but there was no denying the defeat he had suffered. "I know you've been expecting me," Terran said, his voice measured. "The Empire doesn't take failure well, Captain Kor. But neither do I." Kor's grip tightened on the armrest of her chair. "If you're here to surrender, you're wasting both of our time." Terran's lips twisted slightly, but there was no mockery in his eyes. Instead, there was something far more dangerous: calculation. "I'm here to offer a different path. The Emperor's new weapon is real. I've seen it myself. If it's completed, the rebellion will be crushed, and the Empire will return to its reign of terror. However, I've been authorized to negotiate a ceasefire." Kor stared at the screen, trying to process the offer. She could see the flicker of unease in his eyes, though he hid it well. He knew what was at stake just as much as she did. "A ceasefire," Kor repeated, disbelief evident in her voice. "After everything the Empire has done. After your Empire destroyed countless worlds, enslaved countless people, you think you can simply negotiate your way out of this?" Terran didn't flinch. "It's not a matter of morality, Captain. It's a matter of survival. The weapon will destroy us all. I don't want to see the galaxy burn because of the Emperor's delusion." Kor took a long breath. A ceasefire might buy them time, but time was not the only thing at stake. Trusting Terran would be a mistake. He might have been humiliated, but he was still a piece of the Empire's machine. No matter how he spun his words, he wasn't offering them peace. He was offering them a temporary escape to save his own skin. "We don't need your ceasefire, Terran," Kor said, her voice cold. "The rebellion will take the fight to the Empire. We won't stop until your Empire crumbles. No negotiations." Terran's gaze hardened, but he said nothing more. The transmission cut out, leaving a heavy silence behind. Kor's mind churned. This was a clear warning. The Empire would stop at nothing to ensure their dominance, and this new weapon was their final answer. But it also confirmed something Kor had been thinking. Terran wasn't just trying to save his own skin. He knew how dangerous the weapon was. The Emperor's obsession with it might be their greatest weapon. "Kor," Roman's voice came over the comms. "We've got a small fleet approaching from the core systems. They're not just sending one ship, they're mobilizing a full assault." Kor's eyes narrowed. "We've got no time to waste. Everyone, prepare for battle. We'll take them head on. The Emperor's weapon might be a threat, but we are the greater one." The Aegis rallied its fleet, the once scattered ships now coming together with renewed determination. The rebellion had been dealt a devastating blow with the destruction of the Aether Core, but they had also proven that the Empire wasn't invincible. They would face the new weapon head-on, and they would win. Kor stood tall, her voice steady as she gave the orders. This is our moment. The Empire is coming for us, but we're not going to hide. We will face them, and we will fight for every soul in this galaxy. The Aegis soared toward the oncoming enemy, the rest of the fleet in tow. The final battle had begun.